I got two things on that. So one was I got an email that I haven't answered yet, which I'm going to, but I saw somebody was asked the question of um, he listened to the podcast a lot, and he was saying you guys always say when we're talking about hockey things, we give the caveat of like assuming a baseline of skill or like assuming a whatever. And he was kind of asking like, how do you measure what that means? Like, what do you mean when you say a baseline of skill? Like, what is the baseline and how do you measure it? Um, I want to get your kind of thoughts on that question first of all. But my thing was kind of like assuming you can do these things that you just laid out. So if I'm a coach and I'm watching, it's like, can you pick whatever category of skill you want? So let's start with like passing. Are you able to catch a pass? Are you able to give a pass? Do you have are you able to get into passing lanes? Are you making yourself open? Are you taking good routes? These things are what would you'd consider the baseline. If you can do these things, like okay, you're meeting the threshold under the passing umbrella. If you go to stick handling, it's the same thing. If you go to whatever shooting, any other whatever skill you want to do, there's 4 or 5 things within that, which I'm sure anybody could really think of. Are you meeting those? And that's kind of the metric. After that is when we get into the conversation about the next layer of things, which is what you're talking about: the compete, the winning battles, the back checking, the willingness to block a shot, and all of this. So when we have these conversations about assuming you have this baseline of skill, we're saying, Matt, are you checking those boxes? You can basically shoot a puck, you can basically pass a puck, you can basically stick handle, you can basically skate, and that would be, are you at the level of your peers, more or less?
Yeah, I would say the level of where you're playing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. So that would be the baseline. If you're up to par or you're about the average at least for that level that you're at, then you would have that baseline that we're talking about. Beyond that, then we are looking at these things. If I backtrack a little bit, you kind of talked about how, if the Marlies play the Chatham Cyclones, who wins most of the time? It's going to be the Marlies, unless Chatham happens to have a great team on an off year or something like that. Um, Grittiness, compete, and all these other kind of next layer skills will not often bridge that gap if it's that far apart. When you get to
make it harder to play against.
Yeah, it'll make it harder to play against, but it'll still be difficult to overcome that on average. Where kind of we're talking now is if you get into the playoffs, NHL playoffs, OHL playoffs, NCAA, whatever, even higher level AAA. Because I remember, like I always say with my AAA team growing up, we were terrible. And then all of a sudden when we were like 15, 16, we could compete in every game now, but we still lost quite a bit. We were like around a 500 team, 15, 16. And that's like, the puberty competitiveness and all that, I think was bridging more of that gap, kids catching up and all that. But anyways, my point being, where the grittiness to compete can now win you games is, again, given the fact that we're all kind of in the ballpark in terms of our ability. So in the NHL, obviously, any team can beat any team on any night, more or less. When you get to the playoffs, the teams that rise to the top now it's going to be those factors. It's going to be the compete. It's going to be the grittiness. It's going to be the willingness to do the harder things, or the willingness to be the impact player. That's when it can win you games. So for, if you're coaching a really weak team and you go in the dressing room and give the kids a spiel about, the grittiness and the compete and stuff, that's all good. But in reality, if you go play the superstar team, it's not going to bridge that gap necessarily. It'll definitely, to your point, make you harder to play against. But it's more down the line, if we're kind of all in the mix, what's going to win you games down the stretch when everyone's kind of around the same level. That's when all this stuff kind of plays and becomes more relevant. But you were talking, and it just triggered that email that I read when they were kind of asking about that baseline. What does that mean and how do you measure it? And that's basically where we work from. If you're around the average of your level, then all these things we kind of layer on top of that as a baseline. So if you're in the NHL as the most extreme example, the baseline is that. It's like, can you keep up? Are you fast enough? Are you strong enough skater? Are you strong enough shooter, passer? Yada, yada, yada. And then we layer on top of that this discussion kind of thing, right? So
yeah. So did you want me to answer a question on that?
Well, you can kind of throw your thoughts. I kind of answered it myself, but you can throw your thoughts on the kind of that question, or just share your thoughts about that. Is he was asking, how do you measure the baseline? Like, how do you measure
baseline? Is like,
because we always say it like we take it for granted. We're like, assuming you're at the baseline, you're meeting the baseline, then let's have this next conversation we're going to have about whatever topic we talk about.
Yeah.
So it's like, assuming this, now we have this other thing to talk about. So this guy was asking, like, what is assuming this? Like, what is the baseline? How do you measure the baseline? Kind of thing.
Yeah. So it's whatever level you're playing at, or trying to play at, there's a baseline of, skating, right? So let's just like use skating for example. So if you're playing house league pee wee, the baseline is obviously a lot less. It's like it's getting around the ice. If you get to double A, triple A pee wee, or what do they call it, U12, U11, I don't know what it is anymore. The skating is going to be a little bit faster. Doesn't mean it's pretty, but it's going to be a faster pace. It's more agile guy. So the baseline is, as you said, somewhere in the middle of that is the baseline. If you don't have a really good baseline, then your compete level needs to be like off the charts, because that could negate some of your lack of skill, right? So,
Sorry,
can you shoot a puck?
Sorry, that's a good point too. Just for kids, this is one of those things. Again, that's a really good point. Even you made it by accident. Is you get a kid that is just not a good skater. Like I'm thinking of one kid that we had. He played. He would have been what would he been U18 this year? He played, and he's this like gangly, unorthodox skater. But he's a county boy, got the work boots on all the time, and he just makes up for that. Yeah, with heart, like that he doesn't have that prettiness to him when he plays, but he just is so effective at being urgent and getting on pucks and being aggressive and doing all these things that the baseline of his skating is not so far back that he can't keep up, but it's definitely behind. He can bridge that gap by plugging in the compete factor, plugging in the heart, plugging in the willingness, whatever. So you can, to your point, like bridging some of that. Even if you don't meet the baseline, you still have to be in the ballpark. But if you're below the baseline, you can push yourself above where somebody takes a chance on you just because I can't ignore how physical this kid is, or I can't ignore fill in the blank on whatever skill you're making up for with, So it's just
I was just thinking, like, as you're talking about that, I was thinking the OHL. I was watching a game last night, and there's a defenseman that's pretty, like, I'd say a tougher D, shutdown D, not a great skater, like slower boots, but he gets there, and when he gets the puck, it's out. There's not a lot of thought, but it's effective enough, and he plays a role that he doesn't have to go. So, like we say, the baseline, he doesn't go tape to tape every pass. He doesn't outthink so much and have all kinds of fake moves, and it's not elegant in any way, and it's not ugly in any way. But it's like a slower boots, and it's just get it away from me. Because honestly, he's smart enough to realize, like, the more it's on my puck, the worse our team's going to be.
It's on your stick.
Yeah. The more the puck's on my stick, the worse off we're going to be. So he keeps it simple and puts the puck in places where skill guys can do the work. So that's like intelligent. But if you come down on him on one-on-ones or in the corners in front of the net, you're paying a price, and no one wants to be around him. So he buys himself a little bit of room and maybe half a second, because you will pay a price going there. You might get an elbow, you might get hit hard. So that negates that compete factor that he has, negates the skill. And it'd be the same thing as a forward, right? You might not be a great stick handler or even the best skater, or the best shooter, but you have the ability to, be good on the wall and compete and win that battle to get it out of your zone and to get it in the other zone so you can forecheck and hit somebody and create space for your skill guy.
Yeah.
So it's really important, man.
Yeah, those guys are they're always the unsung heroes, man. They're the guys that they don't get any. Well, they get love from the team. They don't get like outside of the team. They're not the guys that get the spotlight necessarily, but within the team, guys that are like that, it's like they're always the guys that are getting all the love.
Yeah, well,
they know they need them.
Take Ryan McGuire on Guelph, right? Like, who wants to play against him? It's a pain in the ass. Is he the best skater? No. Is he a good skater? Yeah, decent. It's not the prettiest stride, but it's good. And does he have the best hands? No, but there's that baseline level where he can make moves. Like, he's got some good stuff, but his game is not based on that. But you're anywhere near him, he's going to lay you out. And it's really hard to play against. If you see him chip one into a corner and go get it, it's like, I'm glad I'm not playing against him, because he's gonna hammer you, right? So he's got a baseline skill, and I'm not cutting him up by any means, right? He's got a baseline skill that's good enough, for sure good enough, but the compete level is so high that that's not a guy that you ever want to give up. So he's not the one that gets the first star every night or in stuff like that. But if you're picking guys on the team that stood out, he stood out, right? And again, it's almost like people cheer him on because he's working so hard, but it's like so effective.